Okay, so I've been doing this course for about uh, roughly almost 9 years. I started in 2015, really looking at the intersection of different methods. People were combining methods. Um, I've been in future studies for 25 years. Been becoming quite a journey, and one of the most exciting things that I came across in the last decade was hybridity, people combining different types of work. A lot of it was creative, um, arts based. You probably know about, Jake Dunnigan, Stuart Candy, Anab Jain, doing experiential futures. You've, heard of other people doing gaming, people like John Sweeney and others doing games, participatory futures, Aaron Rosa's work in Germany. So I got inspired by this hybridity that was happening in the field, and I began to think about futures as this kind of these new mutant forms of futures, and and the excitement and the potential that existed. And then over time, I became a mutant. I began to think about how I combine my work, how I bring in play into my work, gaming into my work. A lot of my focus now is on participatory futures, which is kind of a type of mutant futures. That's a methodological sort of it's kind of methodological innovation, and that really excites me. It really excites me to be in this kind of space of methodological innovation. And I see that as a resource for the 21st century. I see the 21st century as a place that has great challenges, and we need to um, imagine, collaborate, uh, and experiment, and develop and design new mutant methods to address the 21st century challenges that we face. So that's kind of one of the fundamental places where I started back back, almost a decade ago in this mutant futures journey of mine. And I began doing this work with other people because I knew that I couldn't do it alone. So um, I think in the beginning it was a desire to be more purposeful. I wanted to I wanted to do this mutant work, and I began to work with other people that um, would help me do that. So in 2016, we actually ran a retreat at a friend's farm here in Central Victoria, and we all, began to explore what it meant for us. And so method is, one of those fundamental, kind of pieces in this. And it's sort of where this whole journey began, being inspired by people's methods, um, and methods that can respond to the 21st century challenges that we're facing. And also, I created a method called anticipatory experimentation as part of this thinking about method. And then came this discovery of the power of inner alignment. One of the things I kind of discovered early on was to do this kind of work, I needed to really do some inner work. Um, and I began leaning on the work of Oliver Markley, Sohail Inayatullah, and Ivana Milojevic. Um, Oliver Markley developed an approach called re-imaging, and that used images, metaphor, visualization to um, in a sense, use imagery to help us rethink um, complex problems and inner tensions and inner dilemmas. And then Sohail and Ivana developed CLA of the self. which is a way of using causal layered analysis, but with our own inner journeys. And so the self part really is about unpacking our personal myths, metaphors, and narratives that can inspire us. It also asks questions about what selves we are operating in us and what selves we want to bring forth. We have legacy selves. We got the selves that, our parents instilled in us, and we got selves um, that are kind of waiting to be born. And uh, and then more recently, I asked the question, what selves is the future asking us to bring forth? That's sort of one of the million-dollar questions that I probe in this course. What selves the future asking you to bring forth? So that's pretty fundamental. A third discovery came when I began to really connect this up with, I said, okay, well, it's good to go on inner, and it's good to have the method stuff, but we live in a world and we want to be connected with that world. And so I began to explore, what does it mean uh, to be connected in a way that's empowering, in a way that we feel we are purposefully on a journey. And I've drawn on the work of a lot of the work of Joanna Macy, who you might know, who's just one of the great thinkers and hearts in this area. Recommend her work completely. So, I'll go into some of the ideas here because I think it's useful. Uh, right now, many people are experiencing the existential terror of the world. There's this existential terror. There's so much changing, right? You got jobs changing, you got automation and AI, you got climate change, we got this, we got that. And so, this existential terror, you might call it the existential terror of post-normal times. Oftentimes, instead of engaging with the world, people are using defense mechanisms to cope with this. It could be denial, minimization, conspiracy theories, entertainment, othering, creating enemies, nostalgia, back to the past type of reactions. We see this in politics, right? We see these authoritarian leaders that are using the moment, to their advantage for self-aggrandizement, um, opportunistic, strategies. And these coping mechanisms are a bit like a drug. They make people feel good while the problem remains unaddressed and gets bigger. And I use the term hypernormalization to describe this kind of part of this, what happens within this world that we're in. We live within this kind of outer shell of existential terror, but then this kind of inner shell of normalization. It's what Alexei Yurchak uh, talked about as hypernormalization. He was a Russian emigre who, leaving the Soviet Union, noted that things were completely dysfunctional within the society towards the end of the Soviet Union, but nobody would name it. Nobody would talk about it. Everybody acted as if it was normal. So sort of naming this, yes, lots of things, but then this kind of pretending that things are normal. And then this reduction of temporality to the present. Let's just focus on the next thing, consumerism. And I know that, those aren't the people that do this course, right? But but this is sort of the cultural context that living in, the way that certain political and economic forces kind of move us in one direction or another. And then in hypernormalization, there's no past to draw from and no future to reimagine, making the present unproblematic. The present's fine. And so within that, I've really tried to put a context around what, what uh, what does it mean to live in the time and the place that we're in? It's been really a fundamental question. What does it mean? What does it mean to live in this time and place? And I draw inspiration from a lot of people. Elise Boulding, one of them, one of the founders of peace studies and conflict resolution, one of the founders of future studies, really one of the people who brought those things together. And she talked about temporal exhaustion. Um, if people are too mentally out of breath all the time from dealing with the present, there's no energy left for imagining the future. And so she invented this idea of the 200-year present. The 200-year present began 100 years ago with the year of birth of the people who have reached their 100th birthday today, people who are 100 years old. And the other boundary of the 200-year present, 100 years from now, the 100th birthday of the babies born today. That's someone who's just born today and they're going to be 100. And if you take that, you and I will have had contact with a lot of people from this 200-year span. So she was just using this as a way of expanding. We don't just live in a present, we live in this time envelope, this time horizon. And so temporality is a way to really transform this kind of uh, lack of context, temporal context, and bring it into something that uh, imbues more meaning and more purpose into our lives. So Paulo Freire talked about understanding the unfolding of history is to be able to play a role in transforming it. We have to understand where we've come from, and we have to understand how eras are changing, and we have to put some energy into the transformation of these eras, and to ask ourselves um, uh, what uh, what does it mean for me to live in this transformation of the era? Fellow Brazilian, um, I think, Maria. So, and then Viktor Frankl, who many of you would know, also a big inspiration. He was a Jew, a psychologist who was put in the concentration camps during World War II, and one of the survivors. And what he decided to do was um, to study the psychology of being in the death camps, in the Nazi death camps. A pretty extreme um, uh, choice, but he was compelled to do it. He was a psychologist. He was put in the death camps, and he decided to use all his skills and his training to um, to understand what was going on. And I'm going to do a very crude paraphrasing of his book, Man's Search for Meaning. But basically, he came to the conclusion that the thing that allowed people to survive in these most horrific circumstances was a sense of meaning and was a sense of purpose. And that by creating meaning, even in the most stark situation, that we're able to survive. Now, his situation is very different than our situation. They're not comparable. But what I've taken away from that is um, that that insight tells us that we need to unpack the meaning of our era for ourselves, personally and collectively. We need to, because what we're going through is very challenging. Young people are struggling tremendously. I got two young kids. Adults are struggling. The era we're in is really a big challenge, and that we need to be able to unpack the meaning of this era for ourselves and to create purpose and create meaning within this. So this kind of insight about epic times really comes from these ideas. So the idea of epic times is that we live in epic times. Like, let's not pretend that we don't live in epic times. Let's admit that the times that we are in are extraordinary. Um, they are a massive challenge in so many ways. They are terrifying for many people. We're moving into that, denial, right? All the things that we talked about, the existential terror. So the era requires meaning for us to feel and sense this time. And Epic Times is just a large framework for saying it's a way of giving meaning to what we are experiencing in the 21st century and beyond. Let's give this era meaning. And then it also says that to address the challenges of epic times, we need to be and do different. What does that mean? We need to call forth new selves. I was initially, sort of mentioned this question. What is the future asking? What selves is the future asking us to bring forth? So epic times call forth new selves, and epic times call forth new methods, new strategies for change, for healing. So it's an invitation to create a story of the transformation of our world and to invent and play a role in that story. And so that's the kind of core basic concept around epic times. And yeah, it does frame the current era as heroic or grand in scale or character. Doesn't mean that things are easy, but it does say that we have a role to play collectively as agents of change in the transformations that are unfolding. And finding that role is a very personal thing. Nobody can tell us what that role is. But one of the this is the space in which this course plays, to unpack this epic times for ourselves and to explore what does that mean for each of us uh, and collectively. And so we can see examples of this as well, very intuitive, strong examples, people like Greta Thunberg, who responds to this call for epic times by bringing forth a new self through her, oftentimes spontaneous, oftentimes, through quite intuitive ways. And so, this is some of the questions that we ask in this sort of course. What is the world calling forth? What is the future calling forth? What narratives make sense? What inspires us? And then last year really brought deep time into the course. It was really the discovery of deep time as a resource. Deep time can mean many things. It can mean a 100-year history, a 200-year history. It can mean the Holocene. I've been doing a lot of work exploring what it means for humans to write ourselves out of the Holocene because we're changing the climate so much. I've begun to use the term post-Holocene. But humans have a 300 year thousand history, so we go back further than that. So, what does it mean to be a human traveling through geological eras? And what does it mean to reinvent ourselves as a species in a new geological era? These are questions that inspire me, and that's why it makes sense for me. I think different people will find different narratives and have different definitions of deep time. I don't have this flat definition of deep time. And in the course we did last year, we used multiple categories of deep time. And people, honestly, I'm not super prescriptive. I really want to make this more of an opening for people than anything else so that people can explore what this means for them and come to their own frameworks and ideas. And that also kind of invokes deep time narrative. What deeper time perspectives help make better sense of our own journey? And what are the dimensions of that narrative, of the past, present, and the preferred future? And how can narrative be a call to action that many people can participate in? And then, just going back to that, Viktor Frankl's um, point about meaning, this really is this kind of deep exploration of, where a lot of the old stories, like Joseph Campbell argued for his entire life, the old stories are losing their power. They don't help us. We need new stories. What are those new stories? You know, on one hand, we got false and simplistic diagnosis, right? That's the pop culture, you know, um, blaming China, blaming, creating enemies. We also have nihilism. It's all screwed, and that's not an option for me either. So, what is the meaning of our era? We want to reconstruct meaning, and also drawing from the work of Richard Slaughter here in his T cycle. He had this really beautiful uh, conceptualization of the loss and reconstruction of meaning. Definitely want to acknowledge him here. And then the final bit here is the discovery of futures narrative as a fundamental structure of change. And this is something that for the last year I've really been working with. Um, and I've started to, sort of present on this and run some courses on this. And we can see narrative throughout many different um, social dynamics, social struggles, women's suffrage. We see both the history of patriarchy, the struggles of the present, and women's visions for the future. People like Abril Chimal's been working in this area. Ivana Milojevic has dedicated her entire career to this. These people should be deeply acknowledged for their work. This is another Brazilian photo. A lot of Brazil here, Maria. Um, a picture of Movimento Sem Terra, the landless peasants movement in Brazil, who, have their organic struggles. You know, um, Many of the colonial countries that we live in, uh, post-colonial dynamics still inherit those colonial dynamics of extreme disparities of wealth. Um, and so, the way that MST sees change is, we want people to be enfranchised with land. We want this enfranchisement. When I was in Mumbai, I met people from, who were Dalit, we talk about them as untouchables, but I think the term is Dalit. And they come from more than 1,000 years of caste-based discrimination. And they talked about their visions for undoing the caste system in India. So these deep time narratives of change are quite variegated, and they really do depend on different communities, different ethnic social groups, and it's a very big space. And so this is a really fundamental place of exploration. And of course, the African American struggle. Here's Rosa Parks sitting in the front of the bus. So these are organic narratives, and they're about transforming historical trauma into a story that empowers desired change to create the future that we want. The issue has a history, there's a deep time, it's collective, it's a shared experience, there's worldviews that operate, are implicated in it. And then solutions are probing and long-term, experimental. When we think of deep time narrative, we're not just going to solve something right away. And organic narratives reflect unique past, presents, and futures. And I love this, short but beautiful quote by Martin Luther King. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. Just that natural intuition that we're part of these long, arcing change processes. And um, and let's not get caught in this narrow time frame. Let's see what is the change process that we want to work towards, participate in, help build. And then there's the selves and the roles that are part of it. The roles are a functional dimension of the movement's methodology. What are people doing in these change processes? But also, those roles are asking us to bring forth new selves. They may be uncomfortable, new, or difficult, right? And the narrative's future promise might call forth new aspects of ourselves. That narrative might say, we need you to come forth. When MST is doing their work in Brazil, a lot of these people are being threatened by the land owners, by the legacy landowners, threatened with violence, right? So some of these narratives and change processes and movements are calling forth courage, um, and it requires us to learn and grow as people. So one role that one quote that I like to that I picked up from Rosa Parks. People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, I was tired. The only tired I was tired of giving in. She was tired of submitting. She was tired of the submission, of giving up. And it was time for defiance. Um, so, so that's kind of a general overview. I know that was, lot to unpack. We do lots of processes to work with these different ideas, both personally and socially, collectively. Key ideas: we're living through epic times, um, and it's about discovering ourselves and our deep purpose in relation to these changes that are happening in the world. Exploring narrative, exploring deep time changes, um, and it's in relation to what the future is asking us to be and to become. Um, Core process, lay the groundwork. We start with some pretty basic, kind of housekeeping, and also just getting you on the platform, comfortable in the different systems, and then we just go through different processes in the course. Reimagining self, world, method, um, and it's over 7 sessions, so we got a few weeks to work with. Peer learning, really draw on peer learning, creating a circle of trust. We use introspection, lots of visualization, meditation, journaling, intention, support, accountability, and kind of a lab function, letting people experiment with the ideas that they want to bring forth. That's really important. The whole idea of experimentation and the safety that people have to experiment. If we want to bring something new forth, we have to feel safe. And so we want to create a sense of safety working with each other. So I'm going to stop there. And yeah, I just stop there. Well, that gives us a chance for a bit of question and answer. Really happy to discuss anything that you want. And I'll stop the recording.